So we're now on Daf Kuf Yud Amid Beis, and we're on the second line from the top. Aisua lahu gavra delavi mokir avua ve'ime. So again, we said about Rav Chizda in Surah that he was like the religious supervisor, the pious mashgiach of the city. And whenever people stepped out of line, like they accused this Rami Bar Tamri, they would bring him to Rav Chizda and expect that Rav Chizda would put him into cherem. So there was a person that was brought to Rav Chizda, Delavi Mokir Avua Ve'ime. He simply refused to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Kibbut Av Ha'em, which requires a person to attend to the needs of his mother or his father, waiting on him for mealtimes, dressing him, covering him, escorting him. Now, normally what we do is we could force a person to do a mitzvah. So, for example, if a person refuses to take a lulav on Sukkot, we can bring him in front of the local beis din, the court, and they could beat him black and blue until he finally, kofan al mitzvah, until he finally does the mitzvah. So, kaftua. They tied him up, and they're about to give him lashes. Amalei. Now, it's interesting. The first story that we had was Rami Bar Tamra. Rami Bar Tamra was still available for the second story, and Shavkua let him go. So Rami Bar Tamri is now going to teach us a very fundamental halacha that limits the halacha of kfiyah, the rule of kfiyah ala mitzvahs. Tisanya called mitzvahs asay shemat nschar b'tida in bezin tumata muzar aleh. The Torah says about kibbut av ha'em that you will be rewarded with arichas yomim. L'man tarich yomecha al adom hazos. So that's called batan schara bitzida. And there's no kfir. We cannot force a person. It's not like the lulav case. See, Rashi, about 5 lines down from the top, says, Laman yarichun yomecha. So that's called matan schara b'tzida. The Torah spells out explicitly the reward for that mitzvah. Then we don't force you to fulfill that mitzvah. Just give me a minute. I want to see if I remember what the logic was. Every mitzvah requires that we do the mitzvah for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? L'shma. L'mancha, as we say. You don't do a mitzvah for your own advantage, for your own profit. In the case of matan schar b'tzida, a person could be motivated to do the mitzvah because he wants to get the reward of the mitzvah. He knows about the reward. The Torah spells it out and guarantees him that reward. So he's lacking in lishma. So if we beat him up, then certainly he'll do the mitzvah in order to get that lashing over with, to get it off his back. So that's not going to help the situation. So once his matan schar b'tzida, a person has to really be challenged and face the challenge of lishma. and not to be motivated by the matan schara b'tzida. Amalei, Rav Chizda begins to realize who this Rami Bar Tamra was. They didn't have what we have today. The famous rabbis are on the front cover of Mishpacha magazine. So he all of a sudden, Rav Papa begins to, Rav Chizda, I'm sorry, the piece of the puzzle begin to fit into place. This guy is not, he's not Joe Schmo. He's not just some rank and file citizen. He's a great scholar. Amalei, Ihavis bi Asri de Rabbi Yehuda achvina loch churfai. Okay. When a person is in his local environment, together with his Rebbe, which in this case of Rami Bar Tamra would be if he was in Pumbedisa together with his Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda, then he has carte blanche, allowance to make all the insights and the brilliant comments that he wants to make, and to gain the approval of both his Rebbe and the other members of the community. When he's just a traveling, going inside a city as a foreigner, he can't really show his prowess in Torah scholarship, his insights. So when Rav Chizda compliments Rami Bar Tamra, Rami's response was, if only you would come to visit us in Pumbedisa, then I would show you how sharp I am. So let's just summarize, as we're about to begin the next sugya, the final conclusion of the sugya that we just learned. We have 4 different shitos regarding chal. 2 of them are very extreme l'chumra. One is that in Surah they didn't eat chal. They simply prohibited chal and they threw it out. The second shita, which was Rav in the Lishna Basra, and it was a support that was brought to Rav, is that you're allowed to eat chal, but only on the condition that first you tear it. You do the kriya. And that applies even to roasting. Now we get to the third shita, which is Rav in the Lishna Kama, which is more mekil and lenient. And he says that even though lechatchila and your intention is to roast the chal, you still have to tear it. But b'di'eved, if you roasted the chal, then it's mutter, even though you didn't tear it open. However, we have to add the comment of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, the limitation that although that applies in general, but the exception to the rule is a nursing mother, and there, b'di'eved, because of the fact that the nursing mother's udder is totally saturated with milk, therefore, b'di'eved, if you roasted it, it's also, you don't eat it. But barring that one very rare case of a nursing mother, well, maybe it's not so rare, but b'di'eved, it's mutter. And finally, we have Rav Nachman Shita that we learned yesterday, that there's no need of kriya at all. That chal is mutter. For roasting, I mean. Even without tearing it. So we go from one extreme to the other. Amalei Abayler of Safra ki salkis lahosam. Again, salkis we said means go up to Eretz Yisrael. So they're in Bavel. When you go up to Eretz Yisrael, boy minayhu, please ask what is the minhag in Eretz Yisrael. Now we're shifting our discussion from chal to kaved. The kaved is the liver, and it's saturated with blood. Kavda ma atun be. What do you do with the kaved? Meaning, you got to get rid of the blood in the liver. Is it enough that you salt it like salting any meat of any part of the body? Or maybe that's not even enough in the case of kaved. You've got to salt it, but you also have to roast it in order to remove the dam. Ki solik, and Rav Safra goes up to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechelu Rav Zrika, he encounters Rav Zrika, and he asks him the question. Amalei Anna, if you ask me about my minhag here in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Zrika says, Sholki le, I can testify about the fact that I took this liver and I cooked it. Wait a minute. Sholkule. It doesn't say bishul, it says sholkule. Sholki is a very long kind of cooking, like a stewing. L'Rabbi Ami. And I presented the kaved after cooking it for such a long time to Rav Ami, v'acha. He had no problem eating the kaved. Now, I would have to assume that he salted it. Ki also legabe. Now, this Rav Safra had an answer from Rav Zrika in Eretz Yisrael. Now he returns back to Bavel, and Abai wants to know, do you have an answer to my question? So if Safra comes back to Abaye, tells him the whole story, Amalei, but Abaye says to him, Lemesar nafsho lo komi boile, ki komi boile lemesar chaverta. When the kaved is cooked, you certainly are allowed to eat the kaved. Let's explain why. First of all, the dam of a kaved is called dam evarim, as opposed to dam hanefesh. Right? Dam hanefesh is that spurting blood when the animal dies. The cross between life and death. That blood is achiv kares. Then we go down one level to dam evarim, which are, that's normal blood that's absorbed in various limbs of the body of the animal. And that dam is asur, but not on the same level as dam hanefesh. It's one level below. So maybe you get malchus, but you wouldn't get kares. Okay. Now we have to introduce another concept. There's something called just one second. Dam Shapiresh. I just want to get the language down. 1 second. Okay, I'm not finding it right now. But I think if I remember correctly, it's called Dam Shapiresh. So with regard to Dam Evarim, the Torah distinguishes between A and B. A is where the organ of the body of the animal is saturated with dam, and you cut it open. So that dam is dam shelo piresh. And then you have dam that comes out of the limb. That's the real McCoy dam. Again, it's not dam hanefesh, but it's dam evarim. So now what happens when you cook the kaved? When you cook the kaved, the dam is separated or discharged, if you can use that word, from the kaved. And let's assume that in the pot you were cooking not only the kaved, but other ingredients. So now we have two issues. Number one, can you eat the kaved? And number two, are you allowed to eat the remainder, the ingredients in the balance of the pot? Says Abaye, what are you telling me? You're telling me, Rav Safra, that you met Rav Zrika, and he cooked the kaved and he ate it. Or he gave it to Rav Ami, and Rav Ami ate it without any compunctions. That's not what I asked you. As far as the kaved itself is concerned, when you cook the kaved and the dam comes out, and now it becomes also because the dam shapiresh, the kaved is not reabsorbing the dam because it's too busy being polate the dam. Do you remember we discussed this yesterday? That ID the Torah liflo lo bali. That if there's a preoccupation with being polate, then there's no blia. My problem, Abai was asking, what's the status of the remaining ingredients in the pot? Because the kaved is now preoccupied with being polate, right? It's spitting forth its dam. It cannot reabsorb the dam because it's too busy being polate. But what about the rest of the kedera? All the other elements are now absorbing the dam that's niflat mea kaved. Disnan, right? So the Gemara asks, "Maishno lemeser nafshe delomi boile." What are you telling me? As far as the kaved is concerned, you're not considering this dam as dam. So why are you worried about the rest of the pot? And the Gemara answers Abaye's explanation that underlies his question. Disnan, we learned in a Mishnah regarding kaved in Maseches Trumos that eino neseres. So you're going to tell me, and there the question is whether a non-Kohen is allowed to eat the truma. But anyway, you're going to tell me that actually it's in Masechta Trumas, but we're not dealing with anything relevant to truma. We're talking about the meat of a kaved, and we're talking about he took the liver and he cooked it in a pot. And we're not going to say that it becomes also because it's polate and then boleh and it reabsorbs the dam. So the Gemara says, "Lemesar charatonami lo tiboile." You know, if you're going to be consistent, then it should be clear to you that everything else in the pot is also permissible. Disnan, because in the very same mission it says "Hakaved oseres." The Eseres, Neshi Poletus Veda Bolas. So, in other words, don't ask me any questions about the balance, the other ingredients in the pot. For sure, the Mishnah explicitly says they're awesome. The kaved itself is mutter. Why? Because the kaved is Eseres, Neshi Poletes Veda Bolas. It's too busy discharging its blood, so that it's in that preoccupation it cannot reabsorb the blood. But the same Mishnah says that a kaved oseres, that even though it's not neseres, it itself doesn't become osir, but it does generate an iser on everything else in the pot. So now we have a little bit of a problem over here because Abaye sent Rav Safra on a mission to find out not whether the kaved itself is also. That for sure Abaye understood the kaved is mutter because he poletes ve'ena bolas. But yet nevertheless he was going to ask him, what about the rest of the pot that is absorbing the dam that comes out of the cooking of the liver? But that's also explicit in the Mishnah because Mishnah says kaved oseres. So why was Abaye confused about that? Did he not know the Mishnah in Masechta Trubas? Amalei, so Rav Abaye wants to justify, despite the Mishnah, why he had doubts about the rest of the Kedera. Dilma Hasam Bekavda di Isura. The Mishnah over there is addressing the case of an animal that was treif. Every part of the animal is also, including the kavod, because the kavod of a treifa, and that kavod of a treifa was cooked together with other ingredients. Says the Gemara, we're now on the top of Kuf Yud Aleph, umishum shamnunisa. Now, basically, shamnunisa, which literally translates as fat, miloshin shuman, but really that's a very limited, in this context, a very limited translation. But basically, what we're talking about, that the meat itself is asur b'din treifa. And certainly when you take a chefza d'isura, you take something that's asur, like the kavod of a treifa, and you cook it in a pot, and everything in that pot now absorbs the tam of that treifa, for sure it's asur. That I understand. But mishum damamai, I'm not sure about the status of the dam of a kosher animal. So you took the liver of a kosher animal, it's not a treifa animal, and you cooked it together with other meat. And the question is, what's the status of that dam? Meaning, the liver is saturated with dam. Does that dam prohibit everything else? Because as we said before, the Torah allows you to eat kavod. In fact, a Kohen who does the avoda in the korbanos is enjoined from eating only one thing, that which is muktar al gabi mizbeach. But anything that's not burnt on the mizbeach, he's allowed to eat. So he's allowed to eat the kavod. The kavod is not burnt on the mizbeach. So apparently, what the Torah is telling me, if the Torah knows that A, the kavod is saturated with dam, B, you're allowed, nevertheless, the Torah says you're permitted to eat the kavod, and the Torah is saying somehow that the dam of the kavod is not called dam. It's not prohibited blood. And even if it's absorbed in the kedera through the cooking process by other pieces of meat in the pot, nevertheless, the dam is not an osir. So what the next sugya is going to do, I mean, we'll do that, we'll lean at it tomorrow, is the Gemara is going to try to analyze why, on the one hand, you're allowed to eat the kavod, even though it's saturated with dam, and yet the dam itself is asur, nafkamina, that if you cook the kavod together with other meat in one pot, the other meat in the pot absorbs the dam and becomes asur by virtue of the dam. And that's paradoxical because the kavod itself is saturated with dam, and yet the Torah allows you to eat the kavod. So basically, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out whether the dam of the kavod is only mutter while it's still inside the kavod. That's called lo piresh. But once it's piresh, then it becomes full-fledged dam and it's also. Or do we say no, that once the Torah was matir the dam, while it was still absorbed in the kavod, that dam will never ever become osur, even after it's emitted and discharged into the kedera. That's what we have to figure out. Okay, then we'll stop here, and I wish you a great day. Okay, then I'm on my way to a chasana now, believe it or not.